Hello and welcome to Azure Live Mert to the Future. Today we are going to talk about DevOps, but this time we are looking for a different perspective. And Martyn Coupland is my guest today. Martyn, welcome to Azure Live.
Hey Matt, thanks for agreeing to have me on. Much appreciated.
Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
So before we start, can you please introduce yourself, your community activities, or similar stuff?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, hi everyone. So, I guess first of all, I work for a company called Transparency. I'm the head of DevOps there. My primary role is all around creating and developing a cloud management platform along with the rest of my team, which we do and build that team towards DevOps principles and best practices, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But aside from that, I'm also Microsoft Azure MVP, as well as an ambassador with the DevOps Institute as well. So get to do a lot of speaking, both technically and also non-technically around DevOps as well.
So you've written a book about DevOps adoption strategies, and why did you need to write this book?
So I have written one book before, which was a technical book. It was actually around System Center, so it was quite a while ago. But this one I felt would benefit from not being technical for a few reasons. So first and foremost, there are hundreds of tools that you can use when it comes to DevOps, and a lot of it comes down to personal preference as to which one you decide to use, and some of it is dictated to you by your organization, certainly in the interim, and it shouldn't really be that way. And it's quite a political and certainly a subject that's close to a lot of people's hearts in a lot of ways. But what I wanted to tackle really was at least the initial part of DevOps. So I'm very firmly of the opinion that unless you do the culture, people, and process aspects of DevOps before technology, you're ultimately not going to be as successful as you might be if you do those three things first. So that was kind of the first point, really. And I guess the second point is, when you look at things that are out there on the market today to consume, like if you're a software developer, you generally get DevOps anyway, because you sort of work in that realm, and it's a lot easier to pick up in your day-to-day work. But if you're an IT pro, I think it's very difficult to pick up. So the idea is not to teach people DevOps 101 as such, although there is an introduction which does talk about that a little bit. And it's also not for the complete other end. It's not for the DevOps expert. It's for all of those people that sit in the middle that maybe know a little bit about DevOps, or their organization is trying to adopt DevOps. So it really tries to fill that gap that exists in terms of knowledge that's out there. So you're not an expert, you're not a complete noob at DevOps, but you want to know more, and you're also an IT pro. So that's kind of the gap that it looks to fill.
Okay, great. I couldn't finish the book, to be honest, but I think it's a great book. And with your permission, I would like to go section by section.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, thank you. So the first section is principles of DevOps and Agile. So what are these principles?
Yeah, so in the first section, we're really trying to set some groundwork, I guess, first of all. So it's around level setting people's understanding of what DevOps is, and the primary focus of that is that DevOps is not just about technology. It is about people, process, and culture. And tooling is a part of it, and tooling is a very important part of it later on. But once you've done those things first, but the principles of DevOps really they are those things. They're culture, people, and process, and then technology, and that is the order that I think you should be doing them in terms of how you implement them within your organization. So in the first section, we really try and teach people the importance of that process and why it's important to do it like that. And we also try and teach people, just what we mean by DevOps culture. It's something that people talk about all the time is DevOps culture, but I don't think you could go to many people and they really understand exactly what you mean when you say, I'm going to go implement a DevOps culture at my organization. Most people would turn around and just kind of go, huh? What do you mean? So yeah, the first few chapters are really all about introductions, I guess, to start with. And they're really about trying to do those first forages into, exactly what DevOps is and exactly, why it's something that we want people to learn and why it's something that you should be doing at your organization as well. So yeah, that's really what the first few sections are all about.
Okay, so there's a chapter about avoiding cultural anti-patterns in DevOps. So can you please describe what are these anti-patterns?
Yeah, so when we talk about anti-patterns in DevOps and when we talk about team topologies, so I'm actually referencing a pretty common piece of work that was done by a couple of guys who run an organization called Team Topologies, and they really talk about a couple of things really, but they talk about firstly the team topologies that help make a successful DevOps culture. And one of the things that's important to learn is that it is very much not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to building a DevOps team. There's many different ways that you can do it depending on your organization. You may have a team that includes developers and operational engineers. You may have a team that has them separate with an overlay on top. And you may go down the site reliability engineering route as well, which obviously Google kind of championed and roll forward with. But it's really about describing the ways in which you can work together and collaborate with other teams within your organization to start creating that successful culture. And when we start talking about anti-patterns, we're talking about the things that you need to look out for that will stop that from happening. So a good example of an anti-pattern might be that you have, let's say you're working in a team of developers and you have an operations team that are separate. An anti-pattern would be something that prevents them from working effectively together. And that could be any number of different things. It could be a process within the organization. It could be people as well. It could be people that are hesitant to change and people that are not willing to improve the way they work, or it could be a piece of tooling as well. But most of the time, it's a cultural thing that prevents that from happening. And a good example of that would be where those teams don't have the ability to work closely together. A good simple anti-pattern that exists in most organizations when they try implementing DevOps is actually that they don't really sit near each other in the office. Right? You're trying to get these people to work together and communicate and collaborate with each other, yet they're on different floors of the same building. So that would be an anti-pattern. There's lots of different scenarios and examples where some of those things might come up.
Okay, so how can we measure our DevOps process success? For example, our team or our pipelines, maybe in more technical way.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to measuring DevOps and the metrics behind DevOps, it's I don't think it's always an exact science to start with. It's very difficult to measure how successful you are when it comes to DevOps. When you're measuring pipelines, that's something that's actually really easy to measure because you can measure the success of the pipeline, you can measure how long it's taken, and you can measure bugs that are leaking their way into production environments. There's lots of different things that you can measure there to look back and say, yes, I'm doing a good job, or I guess my team is doing a good job, or no, we're not doing a good job. And there's lots of different things that you can use to try and look at that and get a better idea of exactly where your organization's going. But outside of there, there's things around stability, quality, and velocity that help us measure the success of DevOps. So we've just been talking about things like quality. Stability is also a technical measure as well, where we look at measuring the effect of downtime, unapproved changes, hot fixes, platform availability, the traditional stuff. But velocity is where we start to measure the volume and quantity of work that is being delivered. And velocity can be measured by looking at, say, the lead time or the cycle time. And those are two really good metrics that we can use in DevOps. And for lead time, so if you're looking to ship features really quickly, then lead time is actually a really important metric to measure. And the lead time is the amount of time that elapses between adding an item to your backlog and shipping that item to release. And it lets you measure how long it takes on average to take something from the backlog out to production. Cycle time is very similar, slight difference though, in that rather than measuring when it gets added to the backlog to when it ships, cycle time looks at the time at when work on that work item starts and then when it's completed or when it's shipped. So if you're looking to get ahead of your competitors and release new features quickly, then you want to be looking at measuring lead time. And lead time will give you a good idea as to how your team is performing. And that will also give you a number of metrics that you can kind of help within there as well to basically say, step back and say, are we doing a good job at what we're doing or do we need to improve? There's certain process-based things that we can do as well, which will help along there as well. And that's when we start to get into the realms of things like continuous improvement and continuous feedback.
Okay, so I would like to ask about the tooling, because as you know, DevOps world is always evolving. There are lots of open source and paid products for DevOps, and we have lots of choices. As a company, how can we, or what should we do to choose the correct tool for our DevOps process?
Yeah. So this is a bit of the book actually that tries to give you some information on how to create a tooling strategy for implementing your tooling. So I guess the first thing to kind of say is that you need to bear in mind things like your enterprise architecture and information security. I think one of the things that a lot of teams that are practicing DevOps are probably guilty of is that they don't take those two really core things about an organization into account. And it's actually really, really important. Enterprise architecture is there to manage the complexity of working within an enterprise and the infrastructure and architecture that is deployed around all of the tools that they use. So it's really important to adhere to the rules and definitions that have been set out by enterprise architecture for picking tools and also information security, right? Hopefully we don't really need to explain why information security is important these days. But gone off the time where you engage information security the day before you release something. That is now completely unacceptable in most organizations. You need to be working with InfoSec or information security early in the process to understand what common threats you need to be aware of, because they will have done that level of threat modeling within your organization and for your organization, and will be able to help you develop your strategy for the tools that you pick. The other things that are important to understand as well, that kind of goes in with enterprise architecture, is any architectural requirements. So understanding whether there's a preference for deploying tools on premises, or whether that's in your own cloud environment, or whether you prefer software as a service. It's those kind of decisions that you need to look at as well. And one thing that always gets overlooked is the importance of how you train your staff on how to use these tools. Like, make sure that when you're researching and developing your strategy for implementing your tooling, that you're looking at people that can help get you up to speed. So material that's online in the community, official training courses, unofficial training courses, existing knowledge within your organization, all of those things need to be brought together to be able to understand what investment is needed to get you up to speed. Because obviously you can't just put a tool in and expect everyone to be an expert. You need to understand, as part of your total cost of ownership, how long that tool is going to be in place before you start to get real value out of what you want to use it for. And then one of the most important things, I think, on top of all of that, is making sure you define an appropriate owner and the processes that are associated with that tooling. Right? Quite often, we'll see organizations just throw in tools, and 2 years later, it's never been patched, it's never been updated, no one knows anything about it. The person that put it in has now left the organization, no one knows what it's used for. All of those kind of things are all pretty common still in enterprise IT. So defining people that own the tools and having those owners map processes to tools is important. So don't pick a tool and then try and do the process around it. Figure out what your process needs to be for your organization, and then find the tool that will help you achieve those goals that you've set out in your processes.
Okay, thank you. So some companies don't hire DevOps engineers, and they ask senior software engineers to handle DevOps process. So what do you think about it? Is it correct way to do that, or DevOps engineer is another title to do this?
Yeah, so this is probably quite a hotly contested thing in the industry. Certainly in the UK it is, and definitely in the US. Obviously, the advent of the role DevOps engineer has kind of come about more recently, and what a lot of people try and do is just mold infrastructure engineers into that DevOps engineering role. But actually, you need much more than just the skills that you have as an infrastructure engineer. If you're going to be a successful DevOps engineer, you need to understand the softer side of DevOps, understand what cultural impact you need to have, understand the processes, understand how continuous improvement works, continuous feedback. You need to understand how to build, foster, and also develop your culture, how to implement the framework that you've designed as a company, and then learn how to continually work in that through the life cycle and keep improving it every iteration that you make. And that will work for some people, putting engineers into those DevOps engineer roles. But I think the role of a DevOps professional is slightly undersold in a lot of organizations, where you use a bunch of tools, you use, I don't know, you do certain things, you put a bunch of tools in that are traditionally associated with DevOps, and all of a sudden you say, we have DevOps engineers and we practice DevOps. Actually, if you don't have that culture of DevOps and you don't have that framework that helps you succeed, you just have tools and people that say they're DevOps engineers, and you're not really doing DevOps at all. It is much, much more than just a tool set. So, I think, just kind of winding that back a little bit, you need a balance, right? You need a balance of people that understand the tech and a balance of people that understand the softer skill side of DevOps and the softer skills that come with DevOps. And we call that an E-shaped professional, ultimately, one that understands the various different prongs and the various different elements that are involved in being a DevOps engineer. And it's actually a really fine balance between getting the right amount of techies in, the right amount of soft skilled, and the right amount of engineers that have both. And there will be natural progression for various people within there once you get them into your organization.
Okay, so there is a chapter about value stream mapping, and I think it's a very interesting chapter because it's not a very well-known term. So can you please explain the value stream mapping?
Yeah, so value stream mapping is an interesting one. So value stream mapping actually is a term that we take from another part of industry altogether. So within Agile and within process improvement, there are things like Lean and Kaizen, and they come from the automotive industry. And in fact, Kaizen comes from Toyota, and Toyota came up with a thing called TPS, the Toyota Production System. And that was basically their way of being able to automate the manufacturing of cars. And TPS was actually what gave Toyota and other Japanese manufacturers such a massive head start over European and American car manufacturers. So much so that I think at one point for every car that Toyota were producing, they were producing double the amount of the rest of Europe and America combined at the time. So it took them a long time to catch up. But the word Kaizen actually means continuously improve. That's where continuous improvement comes from. And Kaizen is a discipline of and a process of being able to improve. And out of there comes, ultimately value stream mapping. And so value stream mapping is having a look at the information flow and the product flow and also the time taken to achieve those things. And it's about understanding various different elements within there. So for instance, information flow shows any of the communication of any and all information relates to the process, as well as the transmission of information. So it could go out of the system and back in at another point. Depending on what the goal of your value stream mapping exercise is, you may collect and distribute information on numerous different levels, as well as show integrated systems in there as well. And then when you move into product flow, that looks at how steps of the software development life cycle, all the way from initial concept all the way through to delivery. And it looks at what systems they interact with, what data they require, how long they take, and what the amount of downtime is in between. That's what we put on the bottom, which is called the time ladder. And there's a couple of things within there. So we measure a thing called cycle time, which is very similar to the cycle time we've just talked about, but in value stream mapping terms, it refers to the frequency of features that are produced. Or the average time between comparing two features ultimately. And the setup time is the amount of time that's needed to prepare for any given step. So in software engineering, for instance, it could be the amount of time you need to be able to understand requirements. And then uptime as a percentage is measured and provides you with the total time that any process or system is actually active. So what you get at the end of a value stream map, it's basically a detailed understanding of how a process works. And once you've defined out your value stream diagram or your value stream map, what you actually get at the end of it is a visual way to be able to identify waste. And then you can use things like Kaizen, and you can use different methods of lean processing to be able to take the waste that you've identified and reduce that waste to make your processes more efficient. And that might be by taking the step out of the process if it's not needed. It might be by giving more information to that step of the process to make it more efficient, or it might be automating that step of the process so that a human doesn't need to do it. There's various different things that you can do. But we basically talk about three main things: transport, waiting, and overproduction. So in manufacturing, for instance, we think of it as something physical, obviously moving one place to another in terms of transport. But instead of thinking it a bit from a physical perspective, think about how your tasks are going from one developer to the next developer, or from one developer to the next operations engineer. It could be from architect to developer, designer to developer, whatever it might be. A good practical example of transport identified within a value stream map would be developer to tester. So you can assume that your tester is ready to work on your task. Say they've just finished working on another one. The tester will obviously look at the task. understand what they need to do, and they will start the application, and they will get to the step in the application you want them to test. And that can take time for them to get to that point. So that's what we call setup time. And in that example, that time is generated by the handover. So we could do some things in our testing process to get them to that place quicker so that the setup time is reduced and the handover time is reduced. And if we were to do that, then we've made our process more efficient and reduced the amount of time it takes. So I guess in short and in summary, right, value stream mapping is really the process of value stream mapping comes from the practice of value stream management. And that in itself is the lean business practice. And its aim fundamentally is to understand the value of both development, delivery, and resources. So it helps the flow of value within the organization, provide better lifecycle management, and helps you understand your processes in a lot more detail. And then ultimately, once you understand them in more detail, you can ultimately improve them and reduce some of the waste that you've identified.
Okay, thank you. So on my previous question, I said some companies don't hire DevOps engineers and use on their senior software engineers. And I want to ask about the two main parts of DevOps as a developer, of course, the CI pipeline and CD pipeline. As a developer or a DevOps engineer, are there any key points to need to be careful about on these pipelines?
So I think the best piece of advice I would give anyone that is looking to go down CI and CD is, make sure you understand how you build and deliver applications first, right? If you don't understand how you would manually build an application, that's what CI is, continuous integration. If you don't understand how you take an application from source code to a deployable artifact, then your process isn't going to be what you want it to be. If you understand the manual process, then you can automate it. Fundamentally, from a software engineering perspective, like I work with .NET. So for me, the process is pretty simple. Every time I do something, every time I write something in .NET, it is basically restore the packages, build, test, release, or publish artifacts. And then I can take that artifact ready for continuous deployment and deploy it to wherever I need to. And again, it's important to understand exactly how you go deploy that piece of packaged software or application. And that's going to be different depending on where you deploy it. If you deploy it to a virtual machine, that process will be different to deploying it to a serverless app, which will be different to deploying it to a container that sits on AKS, for instance. So you need to understand all of those pieces of the chain and put them together and really figure out which bits you are going to automate. You don't have to automate everything. Obviously, we can get to the point where it is fully automated, but think about things like reviews, right? Don't just take code that's been committed at gospel, have someone peer review it. Think about security scanning, think about testing. So whether that be unit testing, acceptance testing, integration testing, right? Make sure we don't automatically deploy something that's going to break something else. Microservices help with that somewhat as well, because all of the services are so decoupled from each other that it's actually really difficult, or you can say with confidence that if I work on this microservice, I'm not going to affect anything else because I am working on just this microservice. The only thing that will be affected will be this service. And that's one of the reasons that microservices are actually so good for a lot of use cases. Despite some of the negativity around complex of management and such like in a CI/CD world, it's really simple to package up your service and deploy that service to wherever you want it. So the key advice is understand what you're trying to achieve before you go start building pipelines, because you might do something that you don't intend to do. And obviously the last thing on there I would say in terms of advice would be make sure that you have a method of collecting feedback from the engineers that work on the application and also end users. Like monitoring tools are great, but make sure you have monitoring tools that understand user experience and look at application telemetry rather than just infrastructure telemetry, because you need to get a 360-degree picture of how that application's performing. be that from an app's perspective, infrastructure's perspective, or a user's perspective. And you can use all of those things to go and improve what you're doing later down the line.
Okay, so let's imagine that I've created a very successful CI and CD pipelines. Do I need to go back and look at these pipelines to improve them? Do I need to do this like that, or we need to create a pipeline and we don't need to touch it again?
Yeah, so I guess for smaller projects, you could definitely create a pipeline and never touch it again. But when you get to working in the enterprise or larger organizations, the application changes. The way you deploy it might change over time. It might become more efficient to deploy it slightly differently. You could take advantage. The key thing I always say is, to start with, make sure that you can take your application from source to running on a production environment, or at least a non-production environment, and then build it up from there. Right? Start small and build it up iteratively. Don't go for the big bang approach to start with. Right? If my blog and blog posts and various things go through CICD to be published on there and shared out on social media. That workflow is unlikely to really change, but the workflow of an enterprise app is likely to change over time as new technology comes out. So you always want to be taking a step back and thinking, are we doing this the best way possible? Or should we think of doing something slightly different? So you always want to be taking that step back and having a look at what you're doing and why.
Okay, thank you. So after we heard DevOps for the first time, and there are some ops terms and start to used by some blog posts or companies like DevSecOps, GitOps, or DataOps.
Yeah.
So what is XOps? Do we really need these terms?
Yeah, so there's, like you just said, there's all kinds of terms now that describe all of these different things. XOps is really a catch-all term for anything ops. So data ops, GitOps, DevSecOps, DevOps, FinOps, all of those kind of things, you would all put under the umbrella of XOps. In the context of the book, DevOps is really the tip of the iceberg, and we do talk about some of the other trends within XOps. We talk about, I think, data ops, DevSecOps, and GitOps in a little bit of detail. But you could really write a book on every one of those, and go into much more detail. Key thing to understand is that they're all built on cross-functional efforts, like DevOps is. But do organizations really need them? Some of them are probably more hype rather than anything else, definitely. But I think one thing that everyone kind of agrees on in the industry is that organizations at each stage of maturity on these things, and factors that include their size, age of company, the industry they're working, their level of technical adoption, budget's obviously a big thing, and then culture as well. It's very different. Everyone's very different, and that's where a lot of these things kind of fit in well. But the key thing is that you could deploy XOps within an organization, right? You could implement XOps. You could take FinOps for your cloud spend, DevOps for your production, or DevSecOps for your deployments, and your software engineering, and data ops for your data scientists. So you could turn around and say, we're an XOps organization. But I think the big thing, and I think I wrote this in the book as well, is that there are those that believe XOps is more of a hype, and the risk is that fragmentation is created by all of those different groups that are involved, and that level of fragmentation then further dilutes value that's created and creates extra levels of bureaucracy. And if you imagine large organizations that already have quite a lot of red tape anyway, adding extra layers of red tape is not something that people want to be doing. But I guess one thing everyone can agree on is that agility is at the core of XOps, right? Agility is the one thing that binds all of these things together. And really, since the turn of the millennium, business leaders everywhere really being aware that organizations have to be more agile in order to stay competitive in their industry. And that's why they're all getting a lot of traction. But, you will go to some organizations that just do DevOps. Hopefully they're doing DevSecOps. I try not to talk about DevSecOps too much, because I think there's a danger of it being a completely separate sort of movement, if you like. And actually, I think we should be practicing good security practice anyway within our organizations. We should be getting security teams involved. We should be shifting left some of the things that we do in security so everyone else can speak up about security incidents and speak up about vulnerabilities that they find within their organizations. So it should just be a given. It's core really. It's DevSecOps is around shifting security left to everyone else and making sure that in a DevOps world, at least from a software engineering perspective, the furthest place left you can go is the source code, and it's around preventing data leakage. It's around preventing secrets and vulnerabilities from creeping in at the earliest point possible and manifesting itself along the supply chain. I think, if anything, the stuff that happened, was it last year, with SolarWinds probably increased the visibility of that somewhat for a lot of people. If you'd have said a couple of years ago, there's a real risk of our software supply chain being hacked and us distributing malware ourselves, people would have just looked at you and said you didn't know what you were talking about. But that's exactly what happened. The rogue code made its way into their code base, and they signed that code as part of the delivery process. So they effectively sent out signed code that was trusted by computers it was installed on, and that obviously created quite a problem. So security, is always going to be a focus for people, or should always be a focus for people. I try and make sure that it is just part of the DevOps conversation and done as part of DevOps, rather than thinking of it as a separate thing, DevSecOps. So when you put that security wrapper around DevOps, it is effectively DevSecOps anyway.
Okay, thank you. So I think it is the last chapter in your book, Implementing DevOps in a Real-World Organization. Yeah. And let's imagine an old-fashioned company, and it's a big company, and they don't have any DevOps process, and they want to start implementing DevOps. What challenges they may face while they are starting to implement DevOps?
Yeah, excuse me. So, I guess the last chapter really takes everything that we've learned and try and, throughout the previous 11 chapters, and tries to wrap it into this is a real world, or this is a fictitious organization. Here's some details about the company. What would we do to try and implement DevOps out the back of there? I think the first thing is just trying to recap, right, why organizations move to DevOps. And you need to understand that yourself, right? So the State of DevOps report, the 2019 one, I think it is, that I reference in the book, actually talks about top performers in DevOps being able to deliver faster, have fewer bugs, resolve incidents quickly. And they talk about a number of stats that back that up as well from participants. And they're all things that every organization wants to do. So, people want to do DevOps because it helps those things. And those things help deliver software faster and more efficiently. And you don't cut corners doing that. It's not about delivering faster to save money. It's around delivering more efficiently to be better at what you're doing. So, quite simply, organizations that embrace DevOps practices, they simply get more done, right? They can deliver at better speed, better level of functionality, and deliver better innovation by utilizing those cross-functional teams. I guess, excuse me, I guess one of the other things that you need to kind of bear in mind is the technical, cultural, and business benefits that come with DevOps as well. But one of the things that you need to kind of look at in more detail, and some of the pitfalls that you need to be aware of, is defining what you want to get out of DevOps first. I've been to so many organizations that say they want to do DevOps and they have the right intentions, but they can't define what the value is that they're trying to derive from DevOps, right? Why are we actually doing it, right? And they're all technical reasons, but actually they really should be aligned into business reasons, right? They should be aligned into business KPIs and business scorecards, because as a technology team, we should be helping support the business's ultimate goals, right? And that's why it's so important to get buy-in from the top down when it comes to DevOps, as well as the bottom up, right? People have to be investing in it from the bottom up, but there has to be support from the top down to make sure that they are invested in what you're doing. And if you can turn around as a senior manager or a senior leader within an organization and say, by doing these things, and if you start talking about DevOps to execs, they're just going to turn off because they think it's technical. But if you start talking about helping the business achieve their goals and deliver more value to customers and improve customer experience, ultimately improve and increase profits, then people will start listening and invest in the program that you want to do to be able to ultimately help your organization get further, faster, and smarter. So, you know, there's a few things that you would kind of do really. And in the book, we talk about a walkthrough of how we would transform an organization. So we talk about planning workshops that we would do. We talk about establishing a center of excellence around DevOps to help spread the word throughout the organization. And that's what we call an advocacy model. And the advocacy model is one of the team topologies we were talking about at the middle, where you have a team of DevOps professionals who understand and can help improve culture and people and process, and they work with different teams. And they don't take on the team's tasks, but they help that team improve and work in different ways. And that's why it's called an advocacy model. So we look at setting up levels of governance as well. It's important to have governance at every step of the way. We look at identifying pilot projects that you can look at within your organization, how to assess your capabilities. So assessment's really important in DevOps, especially in transformation, that people don't really pay a huge amount of attention to. But one of the reasons it's really important is you need to understand where you started and how you're progressing and how you're progressing throughout the whole life cycle. So it's really important to step back and assess where you are and make sure that you're making the right progress and the desired progress by working with teams that you're engaged with to assess them on their cultural practices, security practices, monitoring, delivery, you know, all of the different pillars of DevOps. And then finally, we start talking about some of the transformation exercises that you can do. And there's some stuff in there. And one of the ones that I actually really like is you can Google this. It's the Chocolate, Lego, and Scrum game. And it's actually a really good way to get people to understand the benefits of DevOps while they play with Lego and eat some chocolate. So it's kind of a, you know, win-win for most people. And it talks about various different steps of the process. And throughout each mini sprint that you do as teams, you can do different levels of interaction with other members of the team. And what it goes to highlight is that when you collaborate and when you communicate with other teams efficiently, you get more done. And what you get done is of a higher quality than before. So it really talks about some of those sorts of things and talks about the things that we can do. We also touch on reorganizing team structures as well. You know, not to get rid of people, but more into what we call the Spotify model, which is squads, tribes, chapters, and guilds, and it's a format of scaling agile teams. And we talk about some of those things as well. And finally, we talk about how to make sure that you're on the right feedback loop. And the feedback loop is probably one of the most important things out of everything in the book, I think, overall. So what we mean by feedback loop is once you've spent all this time and money investing and getting into where you want to with DevOps, it's obviously really important that you understand and learn from the stuff that you're doing. And by getting on the feedback loop, we mean continuous improvement and continuous feedback. And we mean iterating on what you're doing all the time, so that you, after every sprint that you perform as a team, you take the learnings out of that sprint and you make it better the next time. There are always things you can do to improve on. And DevOps is a bit like a treadmill, right? It always goes round. So as soon as you get to the end of the treadmill, you need to get off, review what you've done, go to the start, get back on, and keep going in that loop. And keep learning from what you're doing, right? Whether those are mistakes, okay, everyone makes mistakes, that's fine. We can learn from those and we can improve so that we don't do them next time. It may be that, or it might be learning what we're doing well and how to make it even better, right? It's not just learning from mistakes, it's also learning and understanding what we're doing well so that we can do that with other teams, or that we can continue to do what we're doing, right? What has become that secret sauce that makes us successful? How can we get more of it? And that's really what continuous feedback and improvement's all about.
Okay, so do you have any recommendations for DevOps engineers or developers to keep up with the key DevOps trends?
So I think one of the best places, so when I first started getting into DevOps, one of the best websites to look at is actually DevOps.com. So people post loads of really good articles, and there's lots of media things on there as well. So you'll see interviews with a lot of the professionals. One thing that's become a lot more accessible, one of the good things that's kind of come out of the pandemic really is you can obviously virtually go to pretty much any event in the world now for free. So things like the DevOps Enterprise Summit and the events that the DevOps Institute run, they're called Skill Up Days. So they do a day every month on a specific topic. So if you go to DevOpsInstitute.com, you can look at what they're doing. And those have, I've spoken at a few of those, but they have experts in certain fields come on and talk about different subjects and various different things. And they're really good things to be able to learn from, and really good things to be able to, take your understanding that one step further. It's okay understanding what you want. It's okay understanding what you think of the subject, but it goes into levels of detail to help you understand exactly how it might work within your organization, and there's lots of different tips and tricks. And they're like mini virtual conferences every month as well. So there's lots of people you can talk to virtually and catch up with, and also bounce ideas off as well. So yeah, there's lots of great stuff out there. And there's lots of great reading as well. If anyone's not read the Phoenix Project and they want to really get started with DevOps, I would definitely recommend reading the Phoenix Project. It's a great starting point for anyone that wants to get into DevOps.
Okay, thank you. And at the beginning, I say we will talk about DevOps with a different perspective. And I can easily say this book is not another DevOps book. It is highly recommended, very nice book. And I can easily recommend to all developers, DevOps engineers, or system engineers. And this is my last question. When can we expect your second book?
So just like the things that we've been talking about around continuously improving and getting feedback. So that's kind of what's happening at the minute with a book in a lot of ways, really. So I've had some conversations with a few people about extra things they'd like to see, things that are maybe not as impactful as I thought they might be, that people are kind of skipping over or quickly reading past. But I certainly expect that in the future we will look to iterate on this and include some improvements, because things change, right? as we've been talking about. So as things start to change in the industry, that will help drive some of the things that will go into a second edition. But there's no timeline for it yet. Obviously, it takes quite a while to write and publish. Certainly from scratch, it's about a 6-month process, so it does take quite a while. But yeah, certainly looking at what iterations we can make into making it even better for next edition.
Okay, and thank you very much for joining me today. And it was a great session, and also it's a great book. And I want to say again, it's highly recommended. So hope to see you on another session soon, maybe.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I would just like to say to anyone that might be thinking of buying it as well, all of the proceeds from it, they're not coming to me, they're going straight to a charity in the UK that's pretty close to me for various reasons. So yeah, if anyone wants to consider buying it, then at least please do to help a great charity.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Martyn, and hope to see you soon.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Cheers.